Okay. Hoping we are doing okay here. Y'all are having a good day. So, let's go ahead and see if we can hop into it. Sorry, I'm going to run in just a couple minutes late. Shouldn't really affect too many people because it looks like there's only like 17 people watching. So that's fine. We can go with it from there. So, all right. Let me go ahead and start by giving you guys a little bit of updates on the channel. A couple of channel news, I suppose. Then I want to get to a couple super chats that went out like this afternoon before, like well before the stream started, that I think have good info. And then we're going to talk about writing prose, and I'm going to give you a live demo. We'll try an exercise, even though you guys are not a classroom. When you're in a classroom, it's really easy to be like, Billy, what kind of character do you think we'll have? And that's kind of what we're going to go. I'm going to try it with Super Chat, and if it fails, then I'll improvise, as I am wont to do. Okay, so going forward with the channel, there's going to be kind of a daily format that I've kind of settled on to be able to produce a little bit more content for the channel a little bit more regularly, because what I had been doing up until now was just when I could make a video, I would make one. And I felt like I was, because of the nature of that, I was putting some work to the side that I really needed to focus on, specifically new writing projects, in order to make videos that were highly relevant that day. Instead of focusing on content that people could enjoy like 3 or 4 years from now. So, basically, Metal Monday is going to be the first one. So Monday, I'm just going to talk about heavy metal because it's a genre of music that I have known and loved for a very long time. So I can talk to it, so I can talk about metal every Monday, either classic albums or new albums. Right now, I'm going to focus on new albums that are coming out because there's a whole bunch of great metal albums that have already come out this year and more that are coming out on the way of bands I'm super interested in. So the first one was Dark Throne, the yesterday's or Mondays. So I did Dark Throne. Here's Majestica. I know the new Abath album literally just arrived on my doorstep, the vinyl. I've already been listening to the digital version, and it's good. I'll tell you that much. So if you're a fan of black metal or a fan of Immortal, I actually think it's more interesting than what the Immortal Leftovers did earlier this year as Immortal. And I could talk about that in the future too. So Metal Mondays are going to be the first thing. Tuesdays, right now I'm going to talk about Lovecraft, but after I'm done talking about Lovecraft, it's probably going to be classic literature. And the reason for that is that that's the stuff I like to read. It's the stuff I like to talk about. It's the stuff I know the best. So it makes sense for me to do a little bit of content on it, draw people's attention to it, and also draw readers who are interested in having discussions about that sort of thing. H.P. Lovecraft is a great one because his stuff is in the public domain. It's in the public domain. Basically, if something's in the public domain in the United States, it's in public domain everywhere. So it's in public domain in the United States. It means it's in public domain everywhere. And that's because the U.S. has the most stringent copyright and trademark laws in the world due to the cozy relationship of various corporations with the biggest government in the world. So yeah, I'll be doing that, which I'm more looking forward to. Wednesdays, Writestream will continue. I put out a tweet the other day that said I don't know how many more I'll do, and that wasn't like it wasn't a bad thing. It was just I will not continue the show. Excuse me. I won't continue the show past the point that it is good, right? Past the point that I can have something worth saying every single week. And so as I look at it, I've done 30. This is be 31. And in those 31, I've covered a huge amount of material, enough material to basically be 2 semesters of topics in composition at a university. In fact, I probably have done better than that because at a university, you're going to talk about a bunch of crap that doesn't matter to anyone. That the professor who doesn't have to operate in the market and the business thinks is important. So this is probably better than 2 semesters of writing courses, topics writing courses. So once I get to like 36 or 38, 36, that'd be 18 weeks worth of lectures, right? Or 2 18 weeks, so a full year. I'll definitely feel like I've done a lot of content there. But it's also good. I just want to point out, sometimes people get very upset when things end. Like if something ends, it becomes like the death of the ego. And that's not me, right? Eventually I'll get banned from YouTube. That'll probably be, it depends on where I go with the content. 2020, because it's an election year, I'll probably get banned in 2020 is when I'm going to decide that it's probably the ban hammer is probably going to find me. I'll probably live on the YouTube through 2019, and then I'll be booted off the platform in 2020 is what I expect. And so at that point, you can cry about losing however many subscribers and fans, or you can just move on and do the next thing. So I kind of feel that way with the Writestream, right? I don't want to continue it past the point that it's good. 52, which would be like an entire year's worth. At that point, it's like it's time to do a new thing. I did, for those of people who remember, I did an entire 4 months of every single day. I did a podcast on writing, and it was great. It was great to be productive. But when it was over, because I left that job and I wasn't commuting with my brother-in-law, who's also a writer, then that was done. And people are like, are you going to do more content with Matt? Probably not. That phase is probably done. And that's okay. That's nothing against Matt. It's nothing against us. Like we're best friends still, but it's just a thing. It's just not practical for us to do that kind of content together anymore. That's reality. We both have young families. He's going to have his second kid this month. And so that, it's okay. So a lot of times people get, they get very upset when things end. They have like a crisis. People, when they, like I mentioned post-project depression in another video, people get very depressed when things end. When they finish a project, it's very common to have like a period of depression where you are really feeling empty because of the loss of that thing. I don't want to do that. One of the things that I've done, I'll just give you some hippy dippy stuff about my life. I try to change something about what I'm doing every single year. So something big in my life has to change every year. And if at least one big thing is changing, I know that I'm going forward. And if I'm not going forward, at least I'm going somewhere and I'm learning something. And that's kind of how I've lived it. So I've either lived in a new place every year, gotten a new job, got married. So like if you look at, this year I had my daughter, we moved houses. In fact, I would probably say leading up to that was the period where I felt the 6 months before we moved is where I felt the most, not bad, but I didn't feel like I was going forward. Like I felt the most kind of upset about my place. So I took a month off. We sold our house during that month, and I worked on some other projects. And so now things change. You move forward. So I did that, but the year before that, I quit my job. The year before that, I had a new position at the same job. The year before that, my son was born, and I started a new job, or new job position. The year before that, moved and got married within 10 days of each other, like the year before that, and bought a house so there was like a 10-day span where I moved, bought a house, got married, Before that, I had moved from Las Vegas to LA. I moved halfway through my tenure in LA, changed jobs, halfway through my tenure in Las Vegas, I changed jobs. Before that, I lived for a year in Bakersfield, lived for a year in Fresno. I've lived in all these different places. So every year I try to change something. Once I figured out this kind of cycle, it's really helped me move forward. So, people got kind of down, like, oh no, is this a bad thing? It's like, no, it won't be a bad thing. I just don't want to continue anything past the point that it has quality. I don't want to milk anything, right? Talk about corporations milking their IPs. I don't want to milk my viewers, and I don't want to milk the goodwill that I have thus far established on YouTube. It's just not worth it for me psychically. Anyway, a big long track. I got sidetracked. Metal Mondays. Tuesday is going to be classic literature. Wednesday is going to be Writestream. Thursday, Thinking Thursday, philosophy, math, whatever weird thinking topics I come up with. So the last one was, when you measure the table, you measure the ruler. I might do a follow-up for that one, actually, because there were such interesting comments that people talked about with disorders, the idea of disorders. Friday, Saturday, Sunday, it's going to be random videos. So whatever stuff is current that I want to talk about, whatever thing, like a Star Wars video or a movie analysis, something, whatever's going to be current, that's going to come out, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. If I go see a movie, it's probably on a Thursday night, then I can review it. I probably won't be doing as many movie reviews, even though I've done barely any for quite a while now. And the main reason for that is that I just don't have any kind of time to watch movies. When I do have time to myself, I prefer to be working. And when my kids are up, I don't watch movies. I'll read if they're, if I have time to consume something, it's either like read or maybe play a game. Usually read. So that's good though. I read like 50, 100 books a year or something, and that's good. It's very good for me to do that. So that's what the channel format's going to be going forward. And then today we're going to look at Prose, and I'm going to try to do some live demo of Prose. And before I go and do that, I'm going to read Super Chats. Before I read the Super Chats, I'm going to check out the chat right now. Let's see here. Said my stream's mega comfy. Thank you. Red Letter Media took a shot at H.P. Lovecraft today. Very disappointing. Well, you know what? I've never seen a Red Letter Media video, and I probably never will see one. I know that they're the guys who did did some sort of video ripping on Phantom Menace that was longer than the Phantom Menace, and they probably missed most of the points of Phantom Menace, which is fine, Like someone's like, oh, they said they don't have a protagonist. I'm like, Qui-Gon Jinn is the protagonist. It's like 100%. He's executing all the actions. He's the main character. But people wanted Anakin to be that, and he's not really the protagonist till the second movie. Phantom Menace is a weird movie, but it's really not that bad. If you were to edit Jar Jar out, you'd probably have a much better movie. And some people love Jar Jar, by the way. My wife loves Jar Jar. Bob says he's having a bad day. Sorry. Bob says he's looking forward to classic literature too. Thank you. But how classic? 19th century British and American, or all the way back to the Iliad? I would love to talk about classic literature, Greek tragedy. Iliad and Odyssey are good to look at. There's also, there's a wealth of medieval literature to look at that's just not, it's not focused on. Most of what we have from the medieval period was preserved by the church. So you have a lot of religious stuff. It seems like everyone looks at Beowulf and that's it. But there's a lot of other things too. And there's a lot of philosophy from the Middle Ages that's really worth looking at. The idea that the Middle Ages was an age of darkness is not true. It's a different age than the classical period which preceded it, but not one in which people nobody could read and this and that. Nobody could read. Illiteracy was the norm for Romans, right? It's only until recently that we can look back and say, oh, these people were illiterate and uneducated. And I can talk more about that in other videos. The idea that that people got stupider because priests were celibate is a really silly one too. All right. Have you heard about Star Wars Galaxyland not having any OT characters? I haven't. No Luke, no Han, no Leia, no Darth Vader. $4 billion IP. I absolutely have not heard that. I don't know anything about it other than I have a couple friends who, their business involves Disneyland. And so they, I have a friend who, works on sets. He helped with the, the restoration of, Pirates of the Caribbean. He's a leather worker and a craftsman and does those sorts of things. And I don't know. I don't have any, they didn't work on this, so I have no information on it. What I do know is attendance is down. What's not clear is why attendance is down. I think it's a couple of things. First of all, it's probably they increased the price. They also opened Star Wars Land, and what happens is people that regularly go to Disneyland pick up on these signals, right? And so my wife and I, we used to have annual passes when we lived in LA. We actually had annual passes. I'm not sure when they stopped. They stopped last year, I think. We had annual passes for a year because we knew we'd be down there a bunch, and we're like, this is, we'll just go to Disneyland a bunch with Roan. Now that it was the last year he could go for free without us buying him a ticket, before he turned 3. So I guess it ended last year, and it was good. But we knew that we don't want to have annual passes. First of all, they were making it more expensive, but they were opening Star Wars Land. It's it's going to be so busy. So you might have this reflexive thing where people assume it's going to be really busy because they opened a new area of the park, and it's not. And saw people when they opened it, they went into the park and the park was deserted. No one was coming. It was very strange. But I don't think it had to do with lack of OT characters because people didn't know about that ahead of time. But what might happen is people go in and they're like, well, this isn't really very Star Warsy. This is just like sequel garbage. And then they are uninterested and leave. Whereas it kind of is the same thing with Star Tours. Like Star Tours, walking into Star Tours used to be the most Star Wars experience. There was like droids everywhere. Like it felt like you were walking into you really felt like you were walking into like an area of Star Wars. And when they renovated it, it felt dry and awful. And then they changed the ride. The ride's terrible now. Like it's a motion sickness simulator. If we're not getting Writestream on Wednesday anymore, we better get D&D, COC, or the Warhammer RPG. Yeah, I mean, like we might have an RPG day, something like that. William Hope Hodgson, I have not looked him up. Sorry. Okay. Let's see here. What else? Don't ever try to overwork yourself or force it out of you. I live by overworking myself. Now, here's the thing. Whatever you think your limits are, you're nowhere near your limits. Trust me. Like, most people work at such a fractional amount of their intellectual and physical capacity. It's astonishing. So it's kind of like overtraining. Like if you ever, if you ever meet someone that's at the gym and they're like worried about overtraining, they hear this myth of overtraining. It's like, trust me, you're nowhere near overtraining. You'll know that you're at overtraining when you like can't walk to the gym. You're overtraining. But like most people never get there. There's no way you're exerting your body to the point where you can't ever recover. That's just reality, man. That's one of those things. And that's not to say anything against you, Chin Yoga. That's not a bad thing. It's just I know that like I always can push myself further and harder than what I think is possible. Therapy Thursdays. We'll need it around episode 9's release. Well, I'm not going to see it. So if you don't see it, it's like it doesn't exist. You don't need the theory. What are your thoughts on the band Queen and especially the song Bohemian Rhapsody? I like Queen. I've heard Bohemian Rhapsody too many times, but it's a fun song. I like it. Slightly unrelated, just before I go off, they do a lot of songs like that are just almost schizophrenic with the number of sections they have and the difference between the sections. You may have heard the title track to the Highlander movie where it's like, here we are, born to be kings. That song is so long and has so many sections and you only ever hear the first one. But you can listen to that one if you want to hear something that's like Bohemian Rhapsody, it just goes all over the place. Slightly unrelated, but for a European, would you recommend self-publishing in English or my native language? Depends what your native language is. And so this is a great question. If you publish in your native language, there might be not as many books in your native language. It depends what language you're in. If you're self-publishing in like Spanish, there's a huge amount of Spanish literature going back, right? So I don't know if that market is saturated by that past literature. But the Spanish language market is also huge. It's a massive market. If you are writing in Polish, you probably do pretty well in your own country. But if you are willing to write or publish in English, you're just looking at a much bigger market. Way more competition, but bigger market, which means more potential sales. I think it's probably better if you can publish your first book in your own language and just see if you can really capitalize the market in your own country, like really, really write to the people, write to your countrymen. And you can be very successful with that. You have to think about one of the things that you can do is you can market yourself as a best-selling author in your native language, Polish, because the categories may be very small in the Polish language or whatever language. I'm pretending it's Polish right now because there's less Polish literature than there is Spanish literature or Russian literature or something like that, or German literature. So let's say you're publishing in Polish. And you're going to do fantasy or like science fiction. There's not very many Polish science fiction books. It's really easy to get to number 1 and get that bestseller sticker on Amazon. Then you can use that as marketing. I'm best-selling author Alkaloid. I don't know what your real name is, but I'm best-selling author this. Bestseller author of this. Publishing my first English language novel. If you don't speak English natively or you're not really fluent, I do recommend like a copy editor, at least somebody who will look at the style and recommend grammar changes to make it more idiomatic in English, make it work a little bit better for native English speakers. If it works for native English speakers, it'll work for people who are English as a second language as well. So that is one case where I'm like, it's good to have an editor, is if you don't, if it's a second language for you, there's just lots of little things that you can miss because you're not doing a lot of face-to-face English stuff wherever you're at. Or maybe you are. I don't know. I don't know your situation. A Disney exec said that the reason for the lack of OT characters and setting in Galaxy's Edge is because audiences already saw them and can't imagine themselves as protagonists. That's really dumb. It's a really stupid statement. But yeah, everyone can imagine themselves. Luke as an everyman, everyone can imagine him or herself as Luke. I know that there's women who can fantasize about being Luke, but just not, maybe they're Luke and they bang Han Solo or whatever, right? But it's not, they can imagine themselves as the hero. It really, Luke is not heavily gendered. He's not a feminine character, but he's not Han. He's not like a bad boy masculine character. Anyone can kind of project themselves into Luke's point of view, I think. Do you like Rush? Yes, I love Rush. 199 super chat from Eric. Thank you. I love Beowulf style of prose, legendary or epic feel. So yeah, Beowulf as an epic poem. Very few people write that kind of stuff because no one wants to read it. And I almost wanted to write an epic poem, just to do it. And I don't think anyone would read it. I think it would be so unpopular, but just to do it because no one does it, And actually, I'd probably do it in the Scandinavian style, which is so the way the Scandinavians wrote poetry, it was via alliteration, not rhyme. So rhyme is an English thing, once upon a midnight dreary while I pondered weak and weary. Having these couplets with a rhythm rhyme with each other, that's not the way the Scandinavians wrote it. They wrote it with alliteration. So each line would be all the same letter. So if I was going to write it like Beowulf, then I'd write it with the alliterative style. Or you can write it like the Voluspa or the Prose Edda. Prose Edda in particular is it's alliteration. That's the verse. If you bother to read it in Old Norse, which, unless you're Icelandic, probably is not the easiest thing. I talked to Icelanders and they're like, oh yeah, I can just read it in Old Norse. I'm like, that is incredibly cool. And they're like, how do you read things in Middle English? I'm like, I sound it out and then I realized that I understand it. So yeah, a lot of people who speak English can just read Middle English, even though everything's spelled weird and looks weird, and you hear it out loud. You're like, I know what that means. You get it. All right, let me read these super chats before I get to the subject at hand. These disappear off the chat, by the way. So if you put in a super chat ahead of the show, it will disappear off the chat, and no one will see it. Let me see if I can find the super chats. Super chats. Okay. From, I don't know if it's Kajitan or Kajitan. I'll do Kajitan. I'll do the J. Kajitan. I don't know what. J's are never pronounced the same in every language, I remember my wife has a soft J in her name, and I remember when we met in music theory class like a bunch of years ago now, the professor could never get her name right because she's Dutch. Should I fear imposters on social media? This is a very good question. Do you need a Twitter just to prevent smearing because my writing is the wrong kind of political in the current year? So there's actually two little things in there. The first one is, no, you don't need to fear imposters on social media. Having a Twitter will also not prevent them. So if you have a Twitter, it's not going to prevent smearing. If you don't have a Twitter, it won't prevent the smearing. If you have a Twitter, it won't prevent imposters. In fact, it'll probably enable them. And if you have a Twitter, it won't have it. Like imposters on Twitter. So here's the thing about imposters on Twitter. They are the spurgiest, low-lifeiest kind of people. These are the people who really, they have no time. And one of the things that you need to do is be able to identify, as you get bigger with this, identify the people who have enough time to just hate on you nonstop and eliminate them from you and your circle, from yourself and your circles. But there's nothing you can do to prevent the impersonation except to just be you. And it'll only happen when you're really big, because the reason those attacks and the impersonation happens is because for certain people on Twitter, you gain cred by being a jerk. So SJW mobs on Twitter exist because you gain social favor by being horrible to people, by, you know, calling their employer. You know, you get congratulated in these Discord servers and Twitter for being an absolutely horrific person. That's reality. So if you're not big enough for that SJW to get some kind of social cred for harming you, if no one knows who you are, then you're pretty much okay. It's only once you gain success that you even need to worry about that. Then the other side of that is there's anti-fragility, which is the more you get attacked, the more popular you will get, depending on what's happening, right? And that is because if you're trying to sell a product and the product requires the attention economy, you need people's attention to know your product exists. The more you get smeared, the more you get attacked, the more people are drawn to know of you and your product, the more they spread the message to third parties. Just to give you an example, I would say 90 to 95% of people don't care about the culture war. However, two people fighting over the culture war will be witnessed by that 90%, and that will draw their attention to whatever is being discussed. So anti-fragility is a thing. I have a video coming out about it later this week. Another super chat from Kachitan. If I choose Amazon only publishing, am I forever bound to that for a single book, or can I change it whenever I want? So you can change it whenever. There's two things. So you can, first of all, you can change the book whenever you want. You can change the manuscript. You can upload a new version of the book. You can change the cover, price. You can change everything about it. You do not have to stay Amazon exclusive. So if you do KDP Select, which is a 90-day term, if you violate that, you'll be removed from the privilege of having KDP Select. You won't get unpublished. But if you wait till the 90-day term is up, then you can publish on whatever platform you want. So you can change it. And if you want to go back, you just have to unpublish it on those other platforms and then go back. Cacheton says, is copyright an issue if your book title is already taken? Even if it's part of a series and generic, e.g. Mother of the Wolf, just an example. So the answer is copyright and trademark are different things. Copyright is the work itself. You know, Twilight is copyrighted. Trademark is the branding. That's it, right? So Twilight as a name, as a singular name, Twilight, that has branding associated with it. Now, there's a band back there. Can't see it. Twilight Force. So, could Stephanie Meyer sue Twilight Force for using the word Twilight in the name of their band as a trademark violation? The answer is probably no. Because Twilight Force is a band. No one is confused that this has anything to do with Stephanie Meyer. It's Twilight Force. It's not vampires. It's got a big, beautiful purple dragon on it by the same artist who did my book cover, by the way. So no, you would not get any kind of lawsuit by calling your band Twilight Force. Nor would Dragon Force sue them, because it's obvious this is not Dragon Force, even though it has a dragon on the cover, right? It's a different band. So trademarks exist so that consumers are not confused with products. So if you name your restaurant McDonald's, McDonald's will sue you because that's a trademark infringement. People associate McDonald's with their restaurants. So you opening a restaurant will confuse consumers. They'll think that they're going to a McDonald's restaurant when they're going to your restaurant. Or another way to put it is McDonald's spends a bunch of money on advertising to create value in their brand and their trademark. And when you use their trademark, you are in effect stealing some value of their brand because they have put up the money to make that word, the word McDonald's, associated with what they're doing. It's a kind of theft, right? You're stealing some value. You're being a parasite. Yeah, it's parasitism. So trademarks you may have to worry about. If you're writing a book in the same genre with the same name, that's a problem. right? So I'd pick a different name. I actually ran into this slightly because the original name for Crown of Sight was Crown of Light, because I liked the L better. There's another book called Crown of Light, right? And it's kind of a fantasy book, and it has a really similar cover. I needed to change that, right? And that's because I don't want people to actually get confused with it at all. And not just because I want to avoid a lawsuit, but I don't want my readers to be confused. So you want to do that for the same reason. You don't want people to get confused. Copyright. So copyright won't be an issue. Trademark could be. I would avoid it. I would try to you want to differentiate your brand. If you're worried about am I going to get sued because I have the same name, you should pick a different name if you can. Let's see here. Same question as previous one, but for book cover, I want to use a generic drawing of an animal face. I'm sure someone did that before. If it's not the same image or the image is in public domain, you don't have to worry about it. Public domain images, you can use the same image as another writer. It's not an issue. If it's not in the public domain and you've licensed it and they've licensed it, it's also not an issue. It's also not a copyright issue. It's only a copyright issue if you don't own the copyright to the image and you use it. And it doesn't matter if someone else has used it before. If you don't have the copyright to the image and you use it, that's an issue. That's like stealing, right? Let's see here. What are your thoughts on Edgar Rice Burroughs' John Carter books? I like them. I'll probably cover them at some point, along with Moorcock, Robert E. Howard. Did you miss anything important? No. When's your own gamer water coming out? Will it be like Super Water and Space Jam? It'll come with butter and protein powder for you to make some kind of keto drink. I don't know. We'll see. So yeah, every so often I get these libertarian guys like stealing, like it's not stealing. Well, let's put it this way, is it harmful? Well, if someone goes into a McDonald's restaurant and they get food poisoning from it, but it's not actually a McDonald's restaurant, it's just someone taking the name, then it causes harm to the brand. And that's measurable. If somebody is simply naming their restaurant McDonald's and hoping you come to it thinking it's a McDonald's, then they actually are taking some of that value, some small piece of that value. Really, the restaurant owner is being a parasite upon the regular corporation known as McDonald's by not contributing anything to it. So if you take without contributing, is that stealing? Yeah. So let's say that you have an agreement in a community that you have a common field, and everybody is going to take turns mowing the field, and you just skip a day, but you still use the field for your sheep or something. Then you're stealing some value of everybody else's labor because you're not contributing your share in order to retrieve the value from it. It would be like going to work and not doing your work. Like you're on an assembly line putting wheels on a toy and you just don't do it and you collect a paycheck. Have you stolen from your employer? The answer is yes, because he paid you to do a job. You've deceived him, right? You have taken the value away from him and probably cost him more in the other side because he has to send out replacement cars. So yes, that is stealing. U2 says, I believe all IP should be abolished. So why don't you put your money where your mouth is? You go ahead and put a book out and explicitly say, I want other people to take this book, put their name on it, publish it for money, and ask money for it. Why don't you put your money where your mouth is if you actually believe that? Every person I have ever met that says they don't believe in IP will never, ever put their money where their mouth is, give their stuff away completely for free. And I give away tons of free stuff, but I still own the IP, right? But they will never think it's okay for someone to put their name on their book that they spend 100 hours doing and call it their book and ask for money for it. Because in a world without a government, you can still ask for money for your book. So what's to stop some other company, some other person that's more well known? What's to stop, name a big YouTuber? I don't know. What's to stop a big YouTuber from taking your book, putting his name on it, saying it's his, and then saying, no, that guy didn't write it. You should give me the money on Patreon for this book. Nothing. So put your money where your mouth is, spend a couple 100,000 hours writing a book, and then have people steal it from you and say that. Actually, so YouTube, somebody did that in Iraq. Somebody named their restaurant McDonald's. And it was there was an actual thing from that because they were trying to make a McDonald's store. The guy wanted it to be a McDonald's, but he called it McDonald's anyway. You have to think that not everyone is as educated as you. But that's just an example, right? Same thing like if you called your band Metallica, And somebody comes in and it's like, wait, I thought we were going to see Metallica in this, 30,000 person arena that they advertise as Metallica. That's a lie. It's deception. You're lying to take value from somebody that you didn't earn. That's stealing. It's definitely stealing. I'm probably going to ban you if you keep going on like that. I don't think there's moral justification for initiating aggression against someone who does it. Well, if somebody comes over and steals your table off of your lawn, then you're allowed to go retrieve it, however you want to, right? That's how you go with it. Like the anarchist arguments against IP are some of the dumbest ones, and nobody ever puts their money where their mouth is. They make the arguments and they don't put out anything into the world ever. They have no value for the world to steal. When you have nothing from the world to take from you, it's very easy to think that there's no such thing as IP. Right? Very easy. Try doing some work sometime, having your employee, okay, if you do 100 hours worth of work for your employer and he doesn't pay you, is he stealing? Now these same people will say like, well, that is stealing. It's like, why? He didn't take anything from you, did he? He just didn't pay you. It's like, well, he violated a contract. Maybe he's never said he was going to pay you. You just assumed he would. Oh, well, then I guess you're shit out of luck. It's like, no, it's a basic part of our human interaction that these things exist. The idea that intellectual property doesn't exist, I proved it in multiple ways. I get tired of going over the same arguments. Anyway, let's move past it. Let's talk about writing prose. I'm tired of the idiots talking on and on about intellectual property ideas they have no concept on and never created anything. All right, so here's how you go about with writing prose. So I'm going to show you a little document here. Let me move some stuff around so we can see it. We are going to basically write a little scene here, and it's going to go a little bit like this. Here we go. We're going to start with a character, we're going to start with a place, and then we're going to go from there. And I'm going to go through all the things that you need to do prose. Let me see if I can find a good way for you guys to see this. See this here? There we go. Put this over here. All right. There's a big blank document. All right. Here's the basics that you need to know about prose. Prose has a couple of goals. This is the main thing of prose. You have prose and dialogue. Dialogue obviously is people speaking. Prose is going to be three different things. Number one is actions, things happening. Number two is descriptions, painting a picture, telling the reader what they need to see, providing sensory input. And the third one is providing insights into the story, character reactions, things like that. The third one can be either subtle or direct, but the first two are almost always direct in some kind of fashion. Very hard to have indirect description. It's possible, but rather hard to do. So let's start with the first one, action. Actions are somebody walks across the room, somebody picks up a glass, somebody pulls out their sword. Those are all actions. Descriptions is what something looks like. Somebody's walking along the path and the cobblestones are uneven. That's a description. And the third one, insights, is how characters feel about it. Michael felt scared as he walked down the dark path at night. Okay. So those are the three things that make up your prose. And so whenever you're writing prose usually happens to introduce a scene. Doesn't have to. You can start with dialogue. But it'll happen between dialogue to provide those insights, to show those actions, and to describe new things which are presented to the scene. Whenever you're thinking about what you're going to write for prose, before you think about it, you have to think about, number one, the point of view. So your point of view really matters. And your point of view is usually going to be consistent throughout your entire book. So if you're writing in the first person, like I did this, I saw this, I felt this, that's first person. If you're writing in the third person, it is Billy did this, Billy did that, Billy felt this. Okay. Writing in the second person would be writing letters. We're not going to cover that. We're not going to cover that in this video because it's not very popular to do, and it's just a little more complicated to think about how you're going to do that. Just writing letters it's kind of like first person, but not really. So it would really be first person, but in letter form, I guess. So that's gonna determine it. I tend to write all my stories in third person. Occasionally, I've written them in first person. Depends on what you want to convey. If you're in the first person perspective, your perception is limited, and it's really focused on a central character's vision. If you're in the third person, you can be either focused primarily on one character's perspective, or you can be focusing on multiple characters' perspective and switching between them if you want to, right? And that is something that people do. It's called third person omniscient. It's not as popular now. It's more popular in the past. But even if you're focusing on one person, what's called third person personal, you can give extra information that the main character that you're really focusing on maybe doesn't have access to, but provide some insight for the audience. So let me hop on over here. And we will, guys, clear the chat with this IP discussion, or I'm going to mute you or ban you. I'm really tired of repeating the same thing to the same people over and over again. My arguments are very good. If you actually believe your own arguments, then you'll do what I do, but you'll let people steal your work. You'll let people put their name on it. And that's how I know you're actually serious about any of those arguments. Let's see here. What kind of character do you guys want to work with? Do you want an old character or a young character? Just type in chat, and we'll see what happens. We only have about 60 people. So I know somebody wants an old character or a young character. And I'm going to write some character notes up here. Young. All right, first person there. So we have a young male or female. Someone said lass. Feller or lass. A rogue character. All right. Young, dashing, rogue. Female? Let's do female. It'll be different. Okay. What's the name? First name that I see in chat gets the name. I know that there's a delay, by the way. Fella. What's it? Give me a name. Lassie. I'm not doing Lassie. Lassie's a dumb name. That's a dog. Sarah. All right. So we'll put her name here in caps. Sarah. Now, Sarah's going to be visiting someone. She's going to go meet someone. Where is she going to be? Where's she going to meet this person? First place that I see. She has red hair. Someone wanted red hair. We'll put that description in there, and I'll show you how to weave that in. Is she meeting someone at a house, a bar, or like a tavern, or somewhere outside? A graveyard. Somebody said, I see London Forest Apothecary. So let's do a graveyard, and in a graveyard. Let's do an apothecary in London. All right, so it's good. This is scene one. All right away, because we're at an apothecary, I'm going to imagine a pre-modern London. Or I'm going to imagine like a Middle Ages. Or maybe let's do like a fantasy Gaslight London or something. And we want to introduce our scene with our young character. So I like to start with a character name. I think it's good to start with a character name. So if you start with a name and an action, Sarah You want to say basically, let me talk about some style before I write this first sentence. There's different ways to approach style. I'm going to write this one in third person. You can write it in first person if you want. You can go with a more complicated style, which means you're using lots of finesse and, you know, you're mixing up word order and things like that in order for it to sound pleasing to the ear and look pleasing to the eye. You can also just be very straightforward. Sarah walked down the road, this, that. You can use compound sentences or not compound sentences. If you're writing in the first person, like if you're trying to emulate Twilight, it's very simple. The prose is really simple. I looked down frustrated. I unrolled my silverware, picked up my fork, and carefully speared a ravioli. Not a whole lot of, you know, she used the word spear there as illustrative, but it's not. There's not a whole lot to it. All right. So I'm going to do this. Sarah rushed down, or let's do rushed through the narrow alleyway. Rushing astray, red hair from her lips. As she went. The wind drew moisture to her eyes. And we want to do a little characterization, a little insight into this character. So if she's a dashing rogue, chances are she doesn't cry a lot. Something that had grown unfamiliar to her in the days since she became a rogue. So we need to maybe think of some backstory for the days since she had offered her employment. Let's think of a criminal organization name. Give me a criminal organization name. Don't let Disney get the rights to the redhead. They'll blackwash her. A green dress. Okay, she's wearing a green dress. She's wearing green, but she's a rogue. I'm not gonna say. Maybe she's disguised in her green dress. Dresses are not the best thing for like killing people. They're a little hard to get around in sometimes. Not that I know from like. Yeah, I have a very clicky keyboard, Gombi-chan. Not that I know from wearing dresses. The Black Hand. Let's do Black Lotus. Yeah. Black Hand is something else. Black Lotus. We'll do some magic here. She grumbled to herself. She stepped around a stray cat. Causing the inky feline to tip over an empty bottle. There we go. So now we have some sound information. So she's rushing through an alley. We have a subtle telling you that she has red hair. Now you can do this really simply. Sarah was a red-haired woman. She rushed down, like they could do it really straightforward, but people get annoyed with really straightforward prose. That's why I wanted to do this, doing this macro. So I do it in a subtle way. She brushed a stray red hair from her lips. And you draw attention to her lips. You could even draw more from her lips. You could even say something like, you know, if she's been beaten up, you could say bruised lips, right? Her blushed lips. We don't know what that means yet, but it's just an extra. Her lips have a color to them, right? And you can give in more details about her if you want. You really don't need to go overboard with character details, and when you do character details, it's good to spread them out. You know, but we have this insight into her. The wind drew moisture to her eyes. That's an action, but it's telling you that, you know, she's not used to crying. And then she's grumbling because she's making noise. Nothing living nothing living in the darkened passage reacted tinkling. You could do echo, reverberation, the tinkling echo. She released her breath. Now she's going somewhere and she doesn't want to be heard. So that's the information that we're providing with this. I might want to do like maybe one more thing to let you know it's night. Like we haven't figured out that it's night here. We can do the cold night wind. There you go. Now people know it's night. How do you know to move to another paragraph? Great question. It looks like a full paragraph. There's no reason. Officially, each paragraph is supposed to center around an idea. But if you're writing multiple paragraphs of prose in a fiction setting, it doesn't really matter. I'd definitely do a new paragraph if there's a significant action. The paragraph spacing exists to just break up the lines, and you want to break up the lines if you want to draw attention to something. Finally, she reached her destination. Excuse me. Since it's an apothecary, I'm imagining an old door. An old door. So let's do something about the old door. An old iron-shod door. Surprisingly, I don't know, just an old iron-shod door. Let's stop there. Now, I have this other image that comes to my mind, so I always tend to draw the images. She hesitated and found herself looking at... Now, let's imagine that she's looking at the moon. This is what I've seen. She's seen the moon in a puddle. There's something about like reflections at night that I think are great images. So I'm just going to put this in here. She hesitated and found herself gazing into a slightly into an image of the half moon. Trembling in a wind, in a slightly stirring puddle. A leaf from some... now, let's say we want to give a little bit more information. Maybe it's autumn. A leaf abandoned by some great maple. Along the thoroughfare. Taking a breath. Sarah reached up to the knocker. A thing which once bore the image of an eagle. Been reduced to let's have her smooth her dress. Ruffled green skirts. All right, let's see what else. So anyway, we've written some prose here, and here's what we've showed. So action, she's going through an alleyway. The alleyway also lets you kind of clues you into something. She's doing something. She's a rogue. Rogues like to be in alleyways, so it's a great place to start. Brushing a stray red hair. Now we know she has red hair from her blushed lips. We know her lips are red. The cold night wind, so we know it's nighttime, it's cold and windy, drew moisture to her eyes, something that had grown unfamiliar to her in the days since she had offered her employment to the Black Lotus. We'll capitalize Black Lotus. Maybe we'll call it the order to the order. She grumbled to herself as she stepped around a stray cat, causing the inky feline to tip over an empty bottle. Nothing living in the darkened passage reacted to the tinkling echo, and she released her breath. Finally, she reached her destination, an old iron-shod door. She hesitated and found herself gazing into an image of the half-moon, trembling in a slightly stirring puddle. Let's do nearby puddle. A leaf abandoned by some great maple along the nearby thoroughfare. Let's decide. Do we want nearby twice? Puddle at her feet. There we go. She gave, or she pounded out the rhythm. Believe it or not, I always had trouble spelling rhythm, even through graduate school. It's spelled in a way that my brain doesn't like. So, I would write. I'm writing master's thesis with the word rhythm misspelled. That kind of stuff. She pounded out the rhythm she had been taught by. I need a male name for her master. Black Lotus is an extremely expensive magic card. It's probably the most expensive. It's one of the Power 9. There's 9 cards of Magic the Gathering that are very expensive and very powerful. They only really existed in the alpha version of the game, most of them. You have Black Lotus. You have the different colored Moxes. Ancestral Recall. I'm trying to remember all of them. I don't remember all of them. Demonic Tutor. I'm not sure. Soul Ring. I'm trying to remember them all. She's wearing tight leather. I'm having her wear a dress. Let's see here. Name of a master. Balthazar. Ooh. Zebulon. Ooh. Logan. Todd. I'm not sure which one to give it to. I like Giovanni, though. If it's London, Giovanni. Logan. Logan the Shiv. There we go. All right, we have a great intro there. So this could be the intro of a story or the intro of a book. I'm sorry I wasn't watching the chat super close to get like all the details you wanted there. Oh yeah, an old door marked by a sign that says trespassers will be killed on sight. She waited quietly for an answer, noticing in the corner by the iron doorknob a small brass plaque that read, "Trespassers will be killed on sight." Now I'm going to add an extra layer to that for interest. That read, in the ancient code, she knew. I'm gonna get another name from you guys. I'm imagining an old male character named Tunnel Snakes. Tunnel Snakes rule. Let's do Balthazar. I like Balthazar. I had a friend named Balthazar. That's a good name. She knew. But she still felt the middle finger. The trigger I'm imagining a gun that's like hidden in her wrist, so I'm trying to figure out how to describe that. Reflexively tickling. Notice the word tickling. You know, you gotta find those good words. You don't have to use them. And again, if you go with first person, you can just do things really simply, and that's what people like. Reflexively. Modified Derringer hidden in her sleeve. If you guys don't know what a Derringer is, it's a very small gun that was popular in the 19th century. Usually it was 22 caliber, a little tiny little black powder 2-barrel gun. You'd load it. You could hide it like in your hat, and so it was a weapon of really easy defense. So there you go, a small pistol. I'm going to do a modified. See, now Derringer, this is a good question. Like, do I do a modified pistol or do I say Derringer? Because somebody reading this might not know what a Derringer is. This occurs to me, right? So maybe I'll do modified pistol because I don't know I think my part, this will be a fantasy story I'm imagining, so my target audience might not know what a Derringer is. They don't spend a lot of time with guns. So that's something to keep in mind. And I actually ran into this with Muramasa. When I was first writing it, it was strewn, like it was full of these Japanese terms for everything, right? Because those were the Japanese terms, and I just started replacing them because I had so many early readers were like, what is this thing? I'm like, okay, yeah. You know, what's a tsuba? A tsuba is... it's the guard on the sword. It's like, why didn't you say guard? It's like, I don't know why I didn't say guard and I said Tsuba. Because Tsuba's the like official name. It's like, no, not everyone reading it is going to know everything about Japanese swords, bro. You have to use some simple terms. And then of course you can go the other side where people are like, hey, you wrote handle instead of hilt. And it's like, hilt literally means handle. They are synonyms. They are interchangeable. You will find saber manuals that use the word handle. You can use handle or hilt, but you never know. Like, there's always pedants who are just like are super focused on wanting you to use every sword. Like, why did you use scabbard instead of saya? It's because everyone knows what a scabbard is. Yeah. Anyway. Okay, so this is our intro, and so now the door with a great creak, the door swung inward, revealing the candlelit interior of the apothecary. I don't even know how to. Am I spelling it right? Apothecary. Okay, apothecary. There we go. Dirty gray waistcoat. All right, let me mention this thing. So, if you are an American, a waistcoat is a vest. If you're setting something in London, you ought to use the terms which would be appropriate in London at the time, which is waistcoat. So if you read Sherlock Holmes and he says waistcoat, it's a vest. It's what we call a vest here. It's a part that goes just here and buttons down at the bottom. That's a waistcoat. The small bulk of her loaded derringer. I like that too. Yeah, that's great. See, that's good. Small bulk. So it's like there's something bulky about it inside there. Now, we're going to put some dialogue. We'll talk about dialogue next week. I realize it took way too long to get to this. Next time I'm going to start a little sooner and not pay attention to distracting chat. What's our old man going to say? Let's see here. Maybe he's like, so before I write dialogue, I have to think about who these guys are. So this guy's Balthazar. The apothecary. Apothecary dude. Old. Male. Gray beard? What took you so long? Maybe it's there. You're late. Maybe he's like really to the point. You're late, he said in a gravelly voice. Now we can actually like describe it more. Like rather than just gravelly. In a voice like dry sand under a steel wagon wheel. Something like that, right? So you add a little extra flavor. So you kind of want to paint, you're providing sensory information. So each phrase that's going through here, you could say, oh, it's action, it's sensory information, it's character insight. So he said in a voice like dry sand under a steel wagon wheel. Or maybe it's because you don't actually make wagon wheels out of steel. Maybe dry sand under a wagon wheel. Abruptly, he turned around and instead of walked, you can use a verb that gives a better painting of what he's doing. Rather than like he's gonna walk back to a table, but instead of walking, maybe he's like lumbering. Collapsing into a worn leather chair at a wide and cluttered desk. There we go. Staggered. Oh yeah, no. Yeah, instead of lumbered, staggered, right? Like maybe he's drunk or something like that. He's just kind of out of it, man. He's kind of like an old out of it man, you know. Slight limping. So how could you just say slight limping without saying slightly limping? You could say he walked back with a slight limp, right? Or he walked back slowly, slightly limping, right? You can add that in there. His voice was strained. He speak the password or die. See, she already spoke the password by giving the correct knock. So the knock, I'm imagining a rhythm. You could even write it in there. The knock taught by Logan the shit. Maybe we're going to do this in italics. So let's talk about this. So sometimes you can use a lot of different tools when you're writing prose to communicate sound, action, thoughts. One of the things I do is, if rather than communicating, and I'll talk about this next week with dialogue, rather than communicating all the insights via prose, sometimes I like to give thoughts directly. And so when I give thoughts directly, I give them in italics. I did this a lot in Muramasa because we were very much inside the heads of Yoshio and Amaya, and I really liked to just have some time with their thoughts. Woman, Yoshio thought, I suppose it is possible, right? So he's speaking to himself. It lets the reader know that no other character is hearing that interior dialogue, but it feels more like it's just an extra thing. This is why books are so great compared to other media like movies. You can put in so much information. Inebriated gait, I like that too. Staggered inside, collapsing into one. Yeah. Okay. Maybe he goes. What sound do you imagine when it knocks? You wouldn't say knock. Say like top. Let's do top. Top. And let's give the rhythm. Tot. 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 Make the third knock the loudest. It's just an extra little flavor. It's one line. It breaks up this thing of prose, so we have some kind of interest in there. So somebody's opening this up. This will be on the first page as a sound. So sometimes I like to do things like that, or like a rap tap, whatever sound you imagine. You can give an onomatopoeia. Is that the word? Onomatopoeia. Like meow. A word that is a sound. You're late, he said. I don't think you're in a condition to be judging time, Master Apothecary, Sarah said. Softly. Almost honey sweet. All right. So now I'm giving some more information on like how her voice sounds, right? Almost honey sweet, emphasizing the soprano of her voice, right? Now, some people give no extra stuff for dialogue. I say you give it when it's important. So here's a big rule when it comes to writing prose. Don't put things in the prose that aren't relevant or important. So notice I haven't described what kind of dress she has on. It's like, does she have on, does she have lots of petticoats? Is it, what does it look like? It's a green dress. Who cares, right? Maybe she has a cloak. Now I'll tell her she has a cloak. She took her cloak down. intent, she took her cloak down. So the old poison master. He raised a single gray caterpillar-like caterpillar. I don't know how do you spell caterpillar. Oh God, I was so wrong. He raised a single gray caterpillar-like eyebrow. And so I'm trying to say that she's beautiful, but I don't want to just say like Sarah's pretty. Imagine pretty girl reader, right? You kind of you want the reader to kind of impress upon this woman what beauty the reader wants to. So you don't want to be too overly descriptive. You may want to give like one or a couple traits that really make her attractive. So I emphasized her voice. Like a lot of dudes are actually really they don't think that they're aroused by the sound of women's voices, but they definitely are. So it's a good idea if you want someone to be sexually attractive or be seductive in some way, you can give some element of the sound of their voice. That's good. What are Sarah's flaws? She's naive. Who knows? We're just here to do the execution here. I don't know what her flaws are. Maybe her flaws are that she's reckless. So because she's young, standard young person flaws are like reckless, naive, too trusting. Because she's a rogue, though, she may be, she may have too many assumptions about like her superiors. She may be too trusting of her superiors or something. Or think she's doing something other than what she's doing. Who knows? She could be very bad at a number of things, right? Flaws are, you don't have to go overboard with flaws. You don't have to be like, oh, she's an alcoholic. I can always tell some amateur writing thought when you decide that characters need flaws. So rather than giving them regular personality flaws that normal people have and can relate to, they make them drug addicts or sex addicts or like something that just is really off-putting. Probably, I'll give you an example. As I read a book, it was written with Guillermo del Toro wrote it with another author, and it was the Strain trilogy. It was like a vampire trilogy. It wasn't bad. Actually, if you're into vampire books or like even zombie apocalypse books, you'd probably like it. But the first thing he did with his main character, whose name was like Ephraim, I think, was made him an alcoholic and made him a drug addict. And while that's probably very common in Hollywood, your average reader is not going to immediately see that and have a kind of sympathy or pathetic. They're not going to have a pathos for that. They're going to immediately be kind of put off by him. And at the same time, it's like somebody who's pretty high up in the CDC probably is not able to do that while maintaining a consistent addiction problem. Addiction problems really hamper people's normal functioning in the normal world outside of Hollywood. So I could tell that like people who are kind of divorced from reality decided to pick that flaw. A better flaw to pick is something that's like, they have a short temper and they yell, or they're bad with money, or they forget where things are. They put their foot in their mouth and they're socially awkward. You can think of so many that anybody could identify with. You should pick ones that are like that first, before you go to like she's a cocaine addict, she's a sex addict, she's a kleptomaniac. Like I can always tell somebody is not just kind of an amateur, but just doesn't have a lot of real world experience if they want to write characters whose flaws are so divorced from where that character is. Like a rogue would probably not operate very well with a flaw such as kleptomania maybe, but probably not, because if you're stealing from other criminals, you're going to get killed. That's just it. Kleptomania is probably not going to work. Flaw, she's got a Brooklyn accent. Do you have to do a character profile first, though? Her motivations, fears? Probably. Probably a little bit, yeah. Perhaps she has sparkling eyes. There you go. That's a good one. When in the story do you inform the reader of a character's flaws? You can give a small one when you're introducing the character, but you want the big flaws to be just apparent through the normal course of the plot. Maybe this old man doesn't react. He raises an eyebrow and turns away from her. Back to a ledger on his desk. Vocalizing. Sarah pursed her lips. And maybe we want to describe her face right here. She revealed her face. You know. Her pursing your lips is probably all that I want there. Maybe just revealed her face. Produced from a nearby coffer a small bound sack. How much would he charge for this in the 19th century? Okay, I'm going to interrupt this for a great answer. So Terrapar says, I see you're using about a 1/2 inch indent on the first line. I tend to like a 1/4 inch better. Will that make me look like an amateur? So I write with a 1/2 inch indent because this is a manuscript format. So because it's a full-size page, it's an 8.5 by 11. Hopefully you guys can see that it's an 8.5 by 11. Because it's you guys probably can't. There we go. I haven't looked at the screen in a while. There, now you guys can see the sentences. Beautiful. Because it's an 8.5 by 11, I do a 1/2 inch indent. When I actually make a book, I'll do 1/4 inch because it looks better on a smaller format. So, you know, on this one, the indents are a quarter inch, and you can't see them. It's too washed out. When I make an ebook, I make it to a 1/4 inch. Here's how you can do it. So I've showed this in a couple videos. You go to Modify, go over here to Tabs, not Tabs. You go over here to Paragraph, and you notice the spacing. It'll say spacing first line by 0.5 inches. So all I have to do is I can dial that down to 0.25 and hit OK. And notice it changed everything to be a 1/4 inch. So one of the things I do, and I do recommend you do this, is make a style that has the font you want. I write everything in Times New Roman to begin with, and then I change it later because Times New Roman's very easy to estimate word count. Each single space page is 500 words. So I start with the manuscript format, and then I format later. But notice I don't use tabs. There's an indent here, okay? I guess you can just double click it. I learned something here. So double click this, and then it will show it to you. And then I can change the style here for Modify after the fact, and it'll change the whole document. So it's very quick and easy for me to format for an ebook or for a paperback after the fact because of the way that I do it. So that is something that you guys can keep in mind. It makes it easy. This is pre-decimal. I'm trying to remember like all the pre-decimal. If you guys don't know anything about English money, it wasn't a decimal system until like 1972 or something. Would you recommend the software YWriter? I've never used it, so I can't recommend it. let's see here, 20. I don't know what he'd say. Maybe he just says 20 because I'm just going to go with 20 because I don't want to think about English money right now. Like, it's not 20 pence. 20 pounds might be too expensive at this point. Maybe it's just going to say, maybe just say 10 pounds. 10 pounds. Sarah fingered the sack of coins in the pocket of her cloak. She smiled sweetly at the old man, opening her eyes wide. Maybe she has blue eyes. I was told 5 pounds. Balthazar huffed. You know what? He's gonna say like flapping your eyelashes might work on younger men or something. Keeping her face placid, Sarah took out both purses. And dropped them on the table. The apothecary toss them on a nearby scale. I've got something more valuable, a treasure map. See, now you're writing a story. I'm just trying to demonstrate some prose. Now, let's talk about some of the things. Instead of the sack of coins, I'm just going to do fingered the coins. Fingered the coins. So she took out 2 sacks, which means she had planned to get this for 5 using like her feminine wiles, but it doesn't work on Balthazar because he's just too old and doesn't care anymore. Which old men are like that. So I think that works. All right. So this kind of we've written a whole page of good prose, a little bit of dialogue. From this point on, you really start to tell the story through dialogue. So the point of this prose is to set the mood, introduce a character, 2 characters, give you some insights into who the character is, provide some descriptions of the character, and I've done it in a kind of subtle way. This is pretty close to my normal style. A couple of little flares to kind of break up the flow of the words. This is a good idea, actually, to have something like this tot, because that will actually keep your reader interested. Readers tend to, with their eyes, look at a whole page before their eyes go all over the place if you watch someone read. A lot of times people will skip the prose and go to the dialogue. So you want to keep the prose interesting, and you also don't want it to be too much. It's better to have not enough prose and have somebody say, you should add some more stuff in here, than it is to have too much prose and bore your reader and make them skip what you did. That means only put in the interesting stuff. you know. So the first few paragraphs, you can always expect your readers to give you a couple free paragraphs for you to really set the tone. And that's kind of the tone. So we set a tone. It's London at night. It's windy. It's cold. The girl's pretty. She's wearing a green dress. She has red hair. She's trying to get something using her beauty, and it doesn't work. And that's what we have so far. And I don't know what kind of story this could be. This could be a fun little spy story or something. If you wanted to write like a gaslight kind of novel, a detective novel, like something like that. I'm kind of imagining a fantasy version of 19th century London, but it doesn't matter. You know, you do this for you. Okay. Let's take a look at some of the chat and see what people said. I'll start from the bottom and go up. Crowns, farthings, or sovereigns. Is that what it was? I thought it was pounds. Is there a reason the dialogue is separated from prose in those paragraphs? Yes. So anytime you introduce a new speaker, even if it's two speakers, you always do a new paragraph. And so you don't have to tell the person who it is necessarily. As long as there's only two people, you know it's one or the other, and you could just kind of follow along. I separate things like this to draw attention to them. Remember, the paragraph is another tool. Now, I could put all of this in one paragraph, but I want people to see these are separate actions. She pursed her lips. Then Balthazar produced from a nearby coffer a small bound sack. 10 pounds. Now, I want to be sure that we know it's him. Leaning back in the creaking old chair. Now, maybe we want to add like a little patois here or something, right? Nothing I haven't seen before. If he speaks with like a Cockney accent, he'd say, nothing I haven't seen before. You know, he'd say, he'd slur this TH. So maybe we put in like a patois. Nothing I haven't seen before. You know. There's a little flair there, right? You can do that in dialogue. I'll talk about that stuff with dialogue next week. You want to use that sparingly, in my opinion. I think if you're doing too much phonetic regional dialect stuff, it distracts the reader. They just want to know the meaning of the words. You could say he said in a Yankee accent, he said in a Cockney accent. You could say something like that, you know. Because they're in London, I'm kind of imagining this old man's like an East Londoner on some level. Maybe like a East Londoner that's made some money. You know, that's just what I'm imagining. All right, so this is going to be good for today. If you guys want, I can put this up as a Google document or something, and I'll attach it to this video. But we kind of have everything that I want to demonstrate here, which is, you know, you set the tone, you're showing the action, you're giving insight into the characters, and you are describing things so that the reader can get a mental picture of what you're trying to show with this scene. And that's the main thing I wanted to show with this. Let's see here. How about a national credit system? I don't know what they're talking about. Let's see here. Do authors keep a Do authors keep a backlog of excerpts from prose that didn't quite make the cut to whatever projects they're working on so they can use them for other works? I do not. I can't speak for anyone else. The reason I don't is because prose is not that special. I really took a lot of time to write one page, but when I'm alone and I'm not worried about how I look in front of other people, I can really just bang it out and it goes quick. So it's not valuable to me to keep prose. Prose is like code. No reason to keep it. The idea of reusing code is silly. Let's see here. Address that. These ridiculous flaws remind me of the Netflix Castlevania. The hero was a loser alcoholic who somehow managed to still be a badass. I couldn't get through the second episode. I hated the Netflix Castlevania. I thought it was horrible and unwatchable. I thought it didn't have any of the tone of the video game either. The voice acting was terrible. I didn't like the look. I didn't like anything about it. What do you think about a fall from grace character arc instead of a traditional one? A character starts off perfect, but the story makes them a worse person. Then they must do redemption. Yeah, that's it's Black Panther. It's a tragic character arc works. But of course, a redemption one would be they fall down and then they come back. So that tends to work as well. So that's like Black Panther. He's rather than him becoming bad, he just gets beat up and then returns. It works. I think like a fall from grace redemption one. I'm trying to think of any. I can't think of too many off the top of my head right now. Stop and think. Is it true that there should always be a paragraph break when a new character speaks? Yes. Well, how about the quotation comma rules? I think I understand, but not sure. So quotation would be inside of a dialogue. You're like, here is, she said. So maybe you have a character saying, she said. You do a single quote. Big dudes fall hard. You do a quote and a double quote. Mariella said. Whatever. So yeah, you should do that. They're a beautiful oak door. Yeah, you can make it an oak door. All of these are great. So thank you for participating, folks. Film Girl says, I was told I shouldn't put a gender on my main character as to not to alienate the other side, so to speak. I wasn't sure how to react. What do you think? I think it's ridiculous to have a non-gendered character that isn't an asexual alien or isn't like a snail or something like that. Yeah, of course, character has to be male or female. If they're a human being or any human-like being, that's a basic quality of humanity. Somebody trying to tell you that just wants you to fail, I think. People tell you this kind of stuff for what they wish, rather like what they wish existed rather than what actually people want. I think it's completely ridiculous. And you can be as lefty as you want. You can be as SJW as you want. Characters should still have genders because 99.99% of people identify with their birth gender, right? Like being trans or non-binary or whatever terms that they've come up with to express people who aren't like, I'm a girl, I'm a boy, whatever terms that they've come up with for that, that's such a small percentage. There's absolutely no reason to play to that small percentage. And if you're writing a character that's a female, it doesn't mean males aren't going to like to read about that character. I've never had, that's not, I don't, but I really haven't had too many boys say that they don't like that Helga's a girl. Okay, the main character is a girl. She's a woman. That's what I wanted to write. And I've never had any women be upset that a main character in another book is male. And I always include like at least one male character and one female character to kind of have both of those sides. But yeah, I've never had anyone complain. Now I have had very sensitive right-wing guys get upset that I wrote a character with a female protagonist at all. It's like, can't believe you had her like using weapons and killing people. It's like, it's a fantasy novel and she's freaking magical by the end. I can have my character do whatever I want her to do. I'll have her like bash in the head of the king if I want her to. I don't care. It's for fun. The stories are supposed to be fun. And just because it's a girl doesn't mean a boy is going to be like, I can't identify with this girl smashing in the heads of bad guys. Why? No, of course they understand. Harry Potter's main character is a boy and it's more popular with women. People can identify with other human beings that are not exactly the same as them. You don't need, if I'm white, it doesn't mean I only understand other characters that are white. And if I see a black actor on a movie screen, I'm going to be like, well, I can't watch this. This has Denzel Washington in it. Who would watch it? I can't identify with what Denzel Washington is communicating to me. You're like, what a ridiculous racist stance people have when they think about this kind of stuff. Or sexist stance. This idea that women and men can't understand under gender at all in a story. It's retarded. Sorry if that word offends you. Retarded offends you. Would you ever be interested in writing a detective novel or story? Muramasa is kind of a detective novel, but set in feudal Japan. This is gardening. Yeah, this is gardening here. Gardening's kind of writing as you go. Yeah. Could you use those? I usually don't do this much gardening, by the way, guys. What I tend to do is I tend to plot the book out, write out the characters, and then I start. The things which I wouldn't write out ahead of time is any of this prose stuff, any of this stuff that's contained in there other than like her hair color. I don't even write that out. I just know she's a redhead ahead of time. I know what she looks like. I remember, every character when I write them down, I know what they look like. Like I have this vision in my mind from last night for a new story. It's like I know the colors. Like the first scene is in my head. It's at dusk. There's a color of like a purple sky fading to like yellow, and there's a firelight, and the guy has a hat, this big hat, like what a Puritan would wear, but not quite, but with like a lower cap and a big brim, and he's got this crossbow on his shoulder. I could tell you everything about it. So when I write it, all that stuff's just, I don't write that stuff down ahead of time. I just write it when I write it. The only stuff I write down ahead of time are is the event sequence and the characters, like what their names are. Because believe it or not, like halfway through a manuscript, you're like, oh yeah, we're meeting the guy from chapter 1. What was his name? And I just look at my notes document. I'm like, oh yeah, Bentham is his name. Bentham. Fancy seeing you here. Clickety click. Right. Could you use those unlikable traits you mentioned people not liking for villains, such as being an alcoholic? Absolutely, they're perfect for villains. It's called Kick the Dog. You make a villain a cocaine addict, like a cocaine addicted cop is, this is a bad guy. He's a bad guy, right away, if you give him significant vices. But you still want him to be frightening. So even if they might be an alcoholic, how does that alcoholism affect their frighteningness? If they're an alcoholic and they're like an abusive husband, absolutely, that's a frightening idea. If you're writing something that's kind of centered on the woman, maybe there's a wife and her husband is the villain. He's an alcoholic, right, and abusive. That's perfect. Or maybe it's just the dude's romantic interest is in an abused woman and her husband is an alcoholic. I think that was in Rainmaker, John Grisham's Rainmaker. He's romantically interested in this beautiful woman who has this abusive husband who plays minor league baseball, gets drunk and beats her, right? So it's kind of like a save the girl kind of setup, which is interesting. It tends to work. That one tends to work, by the way. Men tend to like the idea of rescuing women. What are your thoughts on Red Sonja? I like Red Sonja. I haven't. If you mean Red Sonja, the movie, I don't really like it that much, but it's okay. I think the problem with I can't identify with the character unless they're like me thing is that people have become kind of pretentious when it comes to representation in media. I think you're right. So Dragon Slayer, I think you're right. People are pretentious about it. I think people don't have a problem identifying with another human being, but they pretend they do. What they want is superficial representation, not anything meaningful, right? So, I wouldn't write a story about a trans character unless the story were specifically about her being trans. And actually, I had a screenplay I wrote that was about a trans character, right? That was something essential about their being. Otherwise, it's a superficial trait and can be discarded at will. So I was like, oh, here's Betty. Betty's a trans woman. It's like, great. What does that have to do with anything? If you're just meeting Betty and she's a passable trans woman, you would never even think that she's trans. Well, like that information just doesn't do anything. It's kind of like when people objected to Scarlett Johansson playing a trans man. And it's like, you can't have her playing a trans person. She's not trans. It's like, it defies the idea of trying to transition to the other gender entirely. It's ridiculous. I'm kind of ranting at this point. Sorry. Yeah, I think it's all pretentious. I don't think they really have a problem with it. But if they did, then they're highly racist and sexist. It's like, I want to see someone like me on screen. I see a woman on screen and I can think about how she's like me. Because most human traits they cross the sex boundary on some level. Obviously it's like, I don't think that I'm like her in the way that she has breasts or the way that her bra irritates her. I don't identify with that, but I can identify with like, oh, she has problems managing money, right? Oh, everyone can identify with that. She's messy or something, right? She's inattentive, easily distracted, angry sometimes. Your description of the man with the crossbow sounds like Hugh Jackman's Van Helsing. Yeah, it kind of does now that you say it, but I'm imagining something very different in my head, because it's just a very different setting than that. Something more like, really, in my mind, is more like Vampire Hunter D. But Vampire Hunter D is ripped off all the time anyway. What do you think of a villain having a point of view? It's interesting, but it ends up becoming an anti-hero character because people will start to identify with the point of view character as the protagonist. So rather than him being a villain, he's not an antagonist. He's the protagonist at that point. So he's just an evil protagonist, anti-hero. There you go. The villain on some level is usually not the focus. The antagonist, the person working against the protagonist. Are there some sins that a main character can do that are unforgivable in the reader's eyes and will forever tarnish their view? I think so, and you can use that to a certain extent. So if you've ever read the Chronicles of Thomas Covenant, you can read the first one. It's called Lord Fowl's Bane. Early in the book, the main character is struggling with this idea of this fantasy world he's been sucked into being real, and is convinced it's a dream, and kind of out of the blue, he actually rapes a 16-year-old girl. Now, this is a very unforgivable sin. Not only is it unforgivable for the reader, not only does it cast him down as wicked, the reader constantly wants him to somehow redeem himself from that evil, and the character does not want to be redeemed. He wants to be hated and wants to hate himself. And he does things which make himself hate himself, and that's one of the things he does. Even though the other characters in the world are willing to forgive him with his penance. They're willing to forgive him for like the wickedness, including the woman he's raped. But as a reader, you're never going to really like him as a result of that. Rainmaker's really good. I like Rainmaker. It's also a really good film by Francis Ford Coppola. Did Rainmaker. It's got Danny DeVito and Matt Damon in it. It's actually it's one of Coppola's lesser known films, but it's excellent. It's one of John Grisham's best. It's one of the best films based on a John Grisham book. The other one probably being Time to Kill with Matthew McConaughey and Samuel L. Jackson. How do rip-offs avoid copyright violations? So this is hard to explain. Like the concept is very clear in my mind, but I realize it's hard to explain. And I'm not a copyright lawyer, so don't take this as like gospel, especially if you're not in the United States. The United States copyright law is the only thing that I've really looked at because it's the only thing that really matters where I'm at. So the copyright is for the entire work, this book. Remember, you have to think that like the combination of words to create this book is an extremely long and extremely unique combination of words. It's more complex than DNA, if you want to think about it like that. It's really complex. So if you copy this work, obviously if you copy, let's say you copy 10% of the work, 20% of the work, word for word, that's a huge, long amount of stuff to copy. Now, you could copy every single element from this if you wrote it with new words, and it wouldn't violate copyright under normal circumstances. So the ideas that are in it, like, okay, you're going to rewrite the story beat for beat. There's going to be a bad guy with a demon sword who's possessed by the demon in the sword. There's going to be a samurai that's chasing him, and he's going to have a female master that he's a retainer for, that he's protecting. And so you have those elements, and you even have Thingam Ramasa in it. Excuse me. You have all of those elements. You could rip off this story completely if you wrote it with completely unique words. You haven't actually plagiarized under the traditional meaning of plagiarism. Now, as far as how that works with trademark, it gets more complicated, right? You can make a copyright case that somebody who's written another book that's very, very similar to this is somehow violating copyright. But it usually doesn't go down well, which is why you almost never see it. The things that you actually see in copyright courts are things like music, because music is so much harder to define. Obviously, a series of a series of words that are the same, it's an intentional copy. But with music, it's a lot harder to define what exactly is, a copyrighted melody. This is a melody that I wrote, and your song uses that melody. It's like, well, I wrote this melody. I didn't know it was yours. I've never heard of you. Two people can write the same melody. It gets really more complicated with music. But generally speaking, if somebody completely ripped it off, it's not a copyright violation because they're not writing it word for word. If they're using trademarks, they can just avoid using those trademarks. So let's say I want to write a Star Wars novel. Instead of calling it the Force, I call it the Sense, or I just call it magic. And instead of the Jedi, it's the Holy Knights, and instead of the Sith, it's the Dark Knights. And instead of hyperdrive, it's superdrive, super engine, lightspeed engine. You just change all the terms. There's no Wookiees. There's none of that. Have you written Star Wars? Well, really, you haven't, which is why you can rip that stuff off and it's not a copyright violation. There's specific things that go into that. Because with trademark, you have to keep in mind, the whole point is what a consumer is going to think is official or is what you've put value into. So something like all of the lore of the Vulcans in Star Trek would be part of trademark and copyright stuff because they're, that's very unique. Hardwick. I tend to only feel represented by characters with traits or experiences like me, like Tobey Maguire's Peter Parker, Adrian Monk, and Brendan Fraser's Adam from Blast from the Past. I actually don't feel that at all. Representation is not a thing. If someone believes taxation should be abolished, do they need to refuse to pay their taxes or put their money where their mouth is? Oh, this guy again. I'm going to put you back in timeout. When do you think Disney monopoly will collapse in on itself? It'll happen when there's like a significant shift in the way people consume media. The government could break it up, but that's probably not going to happen. Iro from ATLA is Chinese, and I'm European, but very much identified with him after Ba Sing Se. Reminded me of my own uncle in a few ways, except older. Yeah, I can see. I can watch Japanese stuff, and even though that's a different culture, there's still elements. There's still personality traits that kind of cross that stuff too. That'll remind you of things. Have you seen The Rising of the Shield Hero? I have not. It deals with the main character being falsely accused of rape. Of course, it pissed off the woke crowd. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. I haven't seen it, so there have been stories about like false accusations. It's definitely a very evocative topic. How many main characters would class as too many for the audience to keep track of? I'm currently working with 4 to 6. Do you think that's a sensible number? How many main characters? Once you get past 3, I think you're in the territory of like epic fiction or something. And I don't know if at that point any of them can be main. You're dealing with like an ensemble cast at that point. And an ensemble cast has a different flavor than something with like a definite protagonist. You can do it. I think the maximum number depends on the amount of screen time or page space that you have to work with those characters. Obviously a very long series like Game of Thrones can have many, many characters that have a lot of focus. More than 4 or 6, they can have like 12 or 20. But it depends on your space. If you're writing a 2-hour movie, you really have a protagonist, an antagonist, maybe. You don't have to have an antagonist. A protagonist, like a buddy, and like a love interest. You have like 3 characters and really one that's more prime than either. And, the main character story is the A story. The B story is the love interest story, and the C story has to do with the buddy. So usually with a movie, 3 is the most I see, but you can do more. You notice with Reservoir Dogs, it starts with like 12 and it quickly goes down to 3. So there's something with that. Ocean's 11 is really 3 characters. Even though there's like 13 people in it, it's really 3 characters. The rest are just kind of minor guys. They're just there to provide some little jokes and stuff. Hardwick Bintho. I didn't mean represented in the sense of here's a character that validates my existence, but more in terms of here's someone I feel similar to. Oh, okay. I see what you mean. Sorry. Thanks for the clarification. I know what you mean now. Yeah. Yeah, I don't. I almost never see someone that I consider myself similar to. I'd say the closest one was watching the movie Whiplash, because I had those experiences. And it was like I was watching, a more intense version of me and a more intense version of a particular band director that I had in college. Is Lord of the Rings considered ensemble then? So Lord of the Rings, maybe, yeah, because it's like Frodo, Sam Gollum, and Aragorn, Legolas, Gimli. Yeah, you're right. It could be. There's 2 narratives happening. I kind of view it as like Frodo and Gandalf, or like Frodo and Aragorn. Gimli and Legolas are supporting characters for Aragorn and Gandalf. And Sam is kind of a supporting, and he's really a main character. He is. So it is kind of an ensemble thing with Lord of the Rings, maybe. But you don't have to think of it in those terms. It can just be, you can have as many as you feel like you have time to develop within relevance to the story. The longer the story is, the more time you have with characters. So if you're writing something as long as Lord of the Rings, you can have lots of characters. You can have Saruman and Gimli and Legolas and Boromir and, everyone. 9 dudes, and all of them have time to develop. Pippin and Merry have plenty of time to develop as well. But it's a long book, so you can have that time. How do you name characters? Do you name them randomly, or does their name have significance to who they are as a person? Depends what I'm doing. I don't give names that are significant to who they are as a person per se, unless it's a name that they've taken on themselves. Like, Logan the Shiv or something like that. And the reason for that is, I'm just going to switch back to my camera here. The reason for that is that my name doesn't have anything to do with who I am. My name is really boring. David Stewart is, I think, the second most common name in the United States, besides like John Smith. It's super common. It's an extremely common name. It's a boring name. It doesn't describe me in any way, shape, or form other than my parents wanted to name me David. That's all it describes, right? So when I name my characters, I try to give them names that are relevant to where they are at. So in Muramasa, obviously, I kept shorter Japanese names, right? So like the main character is Yoshio, not like Yoshitsune or something like that, because I just like I think it was originally named like Yoshimasa, but I changed that because I was like Yoshio. It's simple. Amaya. It's a pretty name. Westerners can read it. I didn't want to go too overboard with every single Japanese name being long. I know that maybe that's bad, and I'm like bad with my audience. I've never had anyone complain. It's like, how come, your main characters don't have any of these really long historical names like Yoshitsune and stuff like that? It's like, no one's complained about it yet, so it's fine. These people have Norse names because they're from what's the equivalent of Northern Europe. I kind of wanted that feel, so I picked names that went with that feel. For Needle Ash, they have names that are phonetically and in some cases actually very similar to names that would be common in northern Italy, which is kind of how I imagine their culture is, a northern Italian late medieval culture. If I were to write something in London, obviously I'd use English names. Now, I will tell you something that I do with names, which is I had a friend who was a producer in Hollywood say, I never use names that start with the same letter in the same work. So if I have if I have a girl named Ashley, I won't have a girl named Amber. Because you see A and A on the page, it gets confusing to read. And that was his thing. Ashley, Amber, who's who? You do Ashley and Beth, right? So that's something that I don't stick to it 100% of the time. But if I haven't, if I am doing a bunch of different names, they'll all start with different letters of the alphabet. So you see the G. Oh, it's Gisali. He's talking. Boom. You know who that is. Oh, I see the M. It's Michael. I see the J. It's Julia. I know exactly who's speaking based on the letter that's there. But occasionally there's repetition. Like Johann and Julia, they both have J. Oh, well. I'm not perfect about it. But yeah, I try to not use the same letter over and over again. Let's see here. So that's a great question, though. If two characters have the exact same goal, then one of them is redundant and they should be merged into one. What do you think of this advice? If they're in competition, absolutely not. They don't need to be merged. Two characters can have the same goal and be in competition. Therefore, they're adversaries. Or maybe they're in friendly competition. Love triangle, right? Love triangle is two dudes who want one girl or two girls who want one dude. Right? How important or unimportant is it to have names that give the reader a feeling for the person or location? Okay, yeah. I think it's good. I think it's good to have that. Immortal Pain. I think that's a good idea. That's kind of what I do. It's not essential, but it helps. I think that lends some flavor, especially in fantasy. What are your thoughts on Dickens' A Christmas Carol? I don't really have any thoughts on it. Sorry. Film Girl says she'll go back and tweak it. Yeah, do it however you want to do, but if it's a movie, too many characters and you may lose track of who's who. I'm having trouble thinking of too many ensemble movies that have more than three. Three seems like the upper limit of a 2-hour or 90-minute movie. Just my experience. Like if we go, let's do like American Pie has an ensemble cast. I talked about American Pie in the Virgin versus Chad film movie. YouTube video. So in American Pie, you have 3 dudes. How many dudes do you have? You have 4 or 5 males, and you have like 3 females. One of the females is the only one that has any kind of life as a character, and that's Tara Reid's character. I'm not saying this is the best movie, but it has an ensemble cast. The guy who's supposed to be the main character gets kind of shuttled off in sequels as they dial into the characters people liked, which was like Stifler and I don't remember the actor's name, but one of the other versions, right? You start to discard the other characters. And so the characters really become caricatures. The 2 of the characters are basically variations on the same character. They could have been merged into one. They're virgins. They're the classic virgin or gamma male. 2 of the characters are classic Bravo or beta males, and then one is an alpha male, and he's just a caricature of an alpha male. He's a big jerk who teases everybody, and it's kind of a virgin's view of an alpha male. So really, even then, you end up kind of focusing. The audience ends up focusing really on like 1 or 2 of those characters over the others. It kind of ends up happening. It's really hard to do. Without it just being really in your face with the characterization. What are your thoughts on Sunset Boulevard? If you mean the street, I don't have a problem with it. There's a street in LA or a street in Hollywood called Sunset Boulevard. How do you determine what abilities a character has? You just give them one or multiple? Just make it part of their history. So think about what abilities. If he's a soldier, right? A soldier usually has general soldiering abilities and maybe one thing he's good at. So, he's a general soldier and maybe he's a combat engineer, right? So he's good at making bombs and blowing things up. I kind of go from there. Everybody usually has one thing that they're good at or they're passionate about, and then so maybe a dude's really good at video games. Maybe he's really into gardening. I meant the movie Sunset Boulevard. I don't know what that is. So here's the thing about asking me about movies. I probably haven't seen it. I watch almost no TV or movies of any kind these days. And I kind of like that. How hard should a magic system be in a story? When should I allow some freedom? It's up to you. Brandon Sanderson has very hard systems, but they're very robust. They're very big. I like softer systems that have a little more freedom. You just need to kind of decide on one thing that can determine success or failure with magic. So like, with Harry Potter, they need wands. If you don't have a wand, you can't do magic. So there's an easy thing that you can take away from a character to eliminate their ability to do magic and give it to the character, and then they can do magic. And if their wand's broken, the magic doesn't work correctly. So a wand in Harry Potter is just a device for in the future for removing magic from a character or giving them magic. Even though it actually doesn't make a lot of sense because Harry can do magic without it at the beginning. It makes the glass disappear. So if they broke Hagrid's wand, chances are he'd actually still be able to do magic, but they just kind of gloss over that. They're like, wands are necessary. How would you go about writing sex? Not erotica, but if it's relevant to the plot. How should someone go about writing it? More than they had sex, but less than 50 Shades of Grey. I am probably not the right person to answer that question. For most books that are not erotica, the first couple books I ever wrote, I wrote full sex scenes. I won't do that again. The reason is you have the chance to upset a reader that doesn't want to read that. You can say that they had sex, you can allude to it. A lot of times authors will just say they had sex, they made love, they made passionate love or something like that. It depends on the genre you're in, though. If you're writing paranormal fantasy, it crosses into romance and erotica territory. You should be detailed. Erotica has some lines, though, that you cross over when you enter erotica when you're being highly detailed with certain descriptions. That people end up saying, well, that's erotica. It depends, man. It's hard. I'm not the best person to answer that. Someone else probably is. What do you think of the idea of a story in which the hero turns into a villain and the villain turns into a hero and defeats him? Well, that's a good idea. I think that'd be interesting. I can't think of any stories that do it off the top of my head, but I'm sure somebody has done that. I have found in some books, movies, anime that I am drawn to the side characters more than the main character. Any thoughts on why this is and how I can keep it from happening? So people get drawn to side characters because they're more sharply drawn than the main character. The main character you draw with subtlety because you get to explore all the elements of his psyche, and you also want him to be identifiable to a wide range of people. So a more subtle approach is more appropriate. But with I think side characters, you draw them a little more sharply because they have less time. You have less time to explore them. So you have them do and say things which immediately define who they are. So in Needle Ash, I have this side character, Gisali. Actually, his name's Gisali, but people say Gisali, so they probably know who I'm talking about. Gisali, he's a knight, and he's kind of a guy who is very into romance. He's a very romantic-minded guy. So he's always giving Michael romantic advice. He's very into whether Michael is romantically involved with someone. He's very cheerful, and so people liked him because he was this big, cheerful, warm guy, and he had all this advice for women, and he was very charming and just had all these qualities. If he was the main character, those qualities would need to be spread a little bit thinner because you'd just be hammered by his personality in every scene. So when the side characters are in the scene, they tend to be very sharply defined so that they can really be something different than the main character, something interesting in and of themselves, serve a purpose in a very efficient manner. And it's not a bad thing that people like the side characters. It's really not. I've read books with sex scenes in them, and I might read one or two of them and then skip over the others. Yeah, if you're doing... So this is another thing, too. If there's a bunch of sex scenes, then it becomes boring, right? Or it just becomes erotica. The ultimate would be how a sex scene occurs in a movie. It's the matriculation of something. So, which means it would happen about 2/3 of the way, 3/4 of the way through the story. Dennis Miller, I'm working on a fantasy story where the main character turns out to be unchanging and static, nearly autistic, and a secondary character emerges as the traditional hero. Thoughts? I don't know. I have no idea how that execution would work out for you. You can try it. I don't think it, what you basically end up though with is that you have it told from a point of view of a character who's not the main character, which you can do. You can do that. I know there's at least one work I'm thinking of that does that, but I can't think of it. Sex scenes must have a purpose, otherwise who cares? The characters involved must develop in some way while having sex. Yeah. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, they otherwise who cares? Only like erotica where people are there specifically for descriptions of sex. But even then, any good romance writer will tell you the sex is not where you like. It's not the juice. It's the relationship. That's what women are interested in. It's geared primarily toward women. No need to beat around the bush. Sex scenes can be awkward to write if you don't want to be very explicit, while just not wanting to allude to it. Sort of difficult to pull off while making sure it's not awkward. Or you can just go the full awkward route and just have it be silly. Is pathos ever a good thing? I'm assuming you mean pathos, not bathos. I don't know. It can be. It can be a good thing. It can get you worried and it can get you emotionally invested in a character. All right, I think I'm going to call it there. I'm a little bit over time. Thanks so much for joining me and evaluating some prose with me. It's been fun. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you're watching this as a video. You can get my newest... Oh, yeah, I don't have a hard copy yet of the newest book. Newest book is called Voices of the Void. It's a horror book, another short read like Crown of Sight. If you've read Crown of Sight and would like to review it on Amazon, please do that. It really helps me out to get reviews. This is a 2-hour read. The new one is about a 2-hour read, a little bit more. It's a little bit longer than this one, which means that you can sit down and read it instead of watching a movie. And that's what I did with these last two books, and they're good. But anyway, you get Voices of the Void for free if you get on my mailing list, dbspress.com/list, and you'll be able to get on it. Let me see if there's any more questions I missed before I get out of here. I'm assuming it's going to be easier to write in third person instead of first, or maybe something specific happens to one of the characters. It depends what you want. First, maybe we'll do another video and do everything in first person to get it. First person has a much different feel. It's much more focused on the perspective. So if you want to use perspective to your advantage, first person's better. Anyway, thanks so much, guys, and I'll see you guys next time.